Hey there, I'm Devin. I'm one of the people behind Useful Books, and this is a quick little video about how we made our new homepage. Yeah, I know it's a bit of an odd subject matter for a video, but I wanted to make this for two reasons. One, as a historical record for ourselves. We did a rebrand, we changed how we describe what we do, and so I just wanted to capture that in one little package so we could go back and review it. And the second reason is to share it with everybody. I learn a lot from watching other people do their work. And so this is my attempt at doing that, just recording how I tackled a massive redesign of our entire company and how I produced the end results, which is this. This is our new website. It's live now at usefulbooks.com. You can go check it out. And if you don't know what Useful Books does, we're a small company that helps nonfiction authors write better nonfiction. So in this video, I'm going to cover three things. First, why we decided to do this project and how we kicked it off. Two, our new logo and rebrand. And three, how I then took all our ideas and marketing copy and stuff like that and translated it into the final site, into the final usefulbooks.com. Because that was not a straightforward process. We went through so many iterations and so many different designs and stuff. So hopefully that's interesting to see those nuts and bolts. So let's get started. Okay, so starting this whole project. When we decided we needed a new home for our whole company, the first thing that Rob and I did was dive right into text. And this isn't something that I used to do. When I started out in my sort of design career, I would go right to pixels. And I learned over time that it's a really difficult way to start because the beautiful thing about starting in text is one, it forces you to be very concise and clear. And two, anyone can edit it. Like anyone in your business or your friend group or your family or whatever, they can open a text document and most people will know how to edit it, change it, comment on it. And so Rob and I dived right into this Notion doc. Oh, and I like Notion for this because it is sort of a site builder. So writing site copy, you can do fun things like link inside the document so people can jump around. It's kind of like a mock-up in its own right. Anyway, this is the first thing that Rob and I wrote. Well, I say first, this is highly refined, but we had this idea of trying to show the author's journey and show how our different parts of our company, the book, the software, the community, touches that journey. And I really like this concept. And I had some amazing visuals in mind that I started drawing my sketchbook around, like, this sort of like timeline that grows as you scroll and things like that. But it was just too high concept. We started sharing this with the broader team and with some of our current authors, and they got it, but they were like, it's just so much to read. There's just so much to figure out. And so over a few weeks, and we were just spending an hour here and there on this, we would re-edit this and change it. And one of the things I like about Notion is you can see how much time we spent and edited, and it just goes on forever. I wrote this version here after that, which was just like a simple letter to a potential customer, right? Like someone lands on our site and it's like, hello there, dear reader. And I like this approach a lot. It's kind of like a 1980s ad man approach. But again, I gave it to people and they're just like, show me what it is. It wasn't visual enough. And so over time, over a few more weeks, we then sort of distilled everything down into this final version, which is basically what you see on the page right now, right? It's, the name, the title, the three different facets for a business, the book, the community, the app, and that's it. And one of the things that happened while Rob and I were working on this is I realized we really need a new brand because while we have this great book, the book isn't the whole company. The book is part of the company. So let's talk about the new logo. So I had a lot of ideas for the new logo. I have my sketchbook next to me and let me just see if I can find it. Yeah. So I had just like pages and pages of potential logos and ideas. And I sort of knew what I wanted because we have sort of this aspiration to be a publisher, maybe not physical books, but ebooks or NFTs or whatever. I wanted a mark that both worked on the screen and I wanted a mark that worked on the spine of a book or on a poster and things like that. And I sort of had an idea of what I wanted, but I just didn't have time to work on it. So I made a decision, which again, should have been is obvious in hindsight, but like it took me a couple of weeks to get to, which is I just need to hire someone who like has this experience as a professional, like logo designer and just do this work. And so after talking to a few friends and asking a few people I'd love to collaborate with, I came across this wonderful designer named Tom Holloway, and Tom instantly jumped the opportunity. And as a designer, I was probably going to be a really, really, really annoying art director on this sort of like consulting project. But Tom was like, cool, whatever, we'll figure it out. So I just wanted to show sort of the process of that, because if you've never done one of these projects before, you might not really know how you sort of handle it. And so after a 2-hour phone call where I showed all my sketches and some mock-ups in Illustrator, Tom came back with this great design directions document. And it just shows a couple of his concepts, real quick sketches. Like here's one with sort of like a constructed stencil. Here's one with just like a pure logo, custom font, and he showed a lot of his inspiration for these different marks. Like this was a fun mark. I liked this one. And the funny thing here, and this is, I think, the important thing to know is I didn't like any of these. I really appreciated the background and work, but none of them felt like what I wanted. And I told him that. When you're working with a designer, especially on something so personal as what represents your company, don't be afraid to just be like, no, I don't like it. Let's start again. Tom took that on board and we dived right into doing concepts. Oh yeah, here's the final product, but let's go all the way to the beginning. So this is what he came back with. I was like, I want something a little stronger, bolder, and sort of like 70s. And we weren't starting from square one, I should point out, because we had this. We had the book cover. I designed this. The title font is set in GT Super, which I love, and the sort of strapline big copy is set in Inter, which is a great, just multi-purpose sort of interface font by Rasmus Anderson. And so we had this, and so Tom sort of had a starting point to base off of, and he came back with this. And over a period of a couple months, he came up with just so many interesting approaches to my crazy and insane feedback. Like, I love where this was going, I would say, and then he'd come back with new mock-ups, and it just kept going and going until one day he hit on this, and it just instantly jumped out of the page at me. I loved this. I loved the feel of it. It felt heavy. It didn't feel right yet, but I saw like, this guy here, and I was like, oh yeah, there's this center core here, these glyphs in the middle. Like there is something really beautiful. And I love the way he did these like ink traps on the gears, which was a feature of GT Super, the font I wanted to use. And he just did some great iterations, and he and I collaborated on this. He's like, you kind of want something like the Sun logo, don't you? And I had to be like, yeah, I do. I love that logo. I think it's just like, I love these sort of intricate plays on geometry in logos. And so he and I did a little bit of collab here, just cutting things up. And you can see how we got from these sort of Gordian knot gear compositions down to the logo. And he came back with sort of the finalized set. It's like, here's like 4 sort of variations of what that jam looked like. And there it is. It's like, wow. I looked at that and I was like, wow, it just sits so nicely on the page. It's big, it's bold, but it has like a nice interplay of white space. And for me, it's like, it looks like a stack of books, right? There's a U, there's the B, but it's also like there's a book with the pages facing you. There's a book resting on its spine and a book resting on its covers. I was like, that's fun. And so then Tom went back and he started sort of setting the things out, and he gave us some really interesting options for the final actual look and feel of it. 4 months of on again, off again, on again work in just a few minutes, but it was an amazing journey. And you can see the amount of work that went into this. Each of these little groups represents like 2 or 3 days of work. So yeah, that's how we got to the end. And that's how we created the logo type. And while this was happening, I was working on the actual site, but all this stuff sort of influenced how I was thinking about how things would fit in a page and how things would interplay. And it was just so lovely to have a professional working in parallel, thinking about this one little tiny thing, which for me is, I know it's just a logo, but it's so important. It's like how you feel about the stuff you're looking at. So yeah, that's the logo. So that's what the logo came about. Okay, let's talk about actually turning the copy into the actual website and designing the site itself. So there's the Notion document, and we ended up on this sort of copy. And while Tom was working the logo project, I dived right into Pixels. And I did that in Figma. So Figma is my design tool of choice nowadays. Whose isn't? Like who isn't using Figma? And this right here is the first thing I put on the page. And there's no layout, there's no grid, there's no nothing. It's just me chucking stuff on the page. And I knew at this time that I wanted to use GT Super as sort of the big headline, big sort of graphic element on the page. And I had this idea around sort of library cards, index cards for the different parts of the sections of the site. So I made this. And then I started, iterating on it. And you can see this sort of theme played out quite a bit. And here the idea was like, this is a bunch of cards stacked up, and the color coding sort of, denotes the different types of sections. And then here's the first iteration where I got all the copy for the timeline stuff onto one page. And, it works. It's a simple layout. I like these sort of numeral index card things. The idea here was each of these tags were clickable and would expand to explain the different things using little modals like this. And then I started, and I think this was the first version I built. I actually built this site out, which took about a day. And this way I could actually share the prototype with the team in a really easy way. And it also helped me think about the code and think about how I want to structure the site. And I do that a lot. I jump between code and Figma or design back and forth, which isn't the fastest process, but because I have to do both, it helps me really conceptualize what I need to create. So I spend like a couple hours in Figma, then I spend a couple hours in code, and yeah, I just do that over and over again. This is the first sort of complete version I thought about. And the idea here is like turning the products into little books. And when you click those books, these modal cards would come up. And I think this is the first time, no, I didn't even use a grid yet. This is me just freehanding everything just to see how it feels. It's also the first time I introduced these proofreader marks, which do feature in the final site. And this sort of comes from the fact that a big part of our process is beta reading and editing. And I wanted to express that somehow. And so, yeah, this is, it's ugly. It's not that good, but it gets some stuff across. And yeah, so I started simplifying it and really simplifying it to the point where I got to this page here. And this is probably looking about a week of work now between code and design. And I got to this stage, and this is cleaner. It's nicer. I think I'm finally using a grid. Yeah. Start to align things. And the idea here is you could click on each of these buttons to sort of learn more. And that's where these modals would come in. And these modals are a mess, man. They're such a pile of junk. There's just stuff. Like, look, there's no information hierarchy at all in this. And again, this is mostly freehanded, just me sticking stuff on the page to figure stuff out. And at this stage, I think the general feedback from the team was like, looks good, which I sort of read as like, it sucks. And I just paused the project. I went to go work on other stuff. It was just taking too long to get to where I needed to be. And then in the new year, in January, so about a month after I paused this project, I decided it's time to get back into it and actually finish this web design once and for all. And so I started a whole new Figma file to just really start fresh. And at this time, Tom had finished the logo. So I had this tiny little thing to stick in the corner, which always feels nice. And I was still stuck on this sort of card idea, but I wanted to simplify it. And so I built this really bold sort of pinboard-esque mock-up. And the idea being that the strapline's a card, the book's a card, the community's a card, there's some graphical elements to add some white space. If you clicked on community, then maybe it would have filtered for just the community cards. And I didn't really know where this was going to go, but I laid this out really quickly and roughly. Like, there is a grid, but it's not really being obeyed. It's really busy. So I did something that I should have done from the beginning, which is I decided to make the mobile sort of layouts first. And I like doing this. Like, working with mobile first really forces you to think about the information hierarchy of your page. So that made me do that. I was like, okay, here's the first thing they see. It's a welcome to the site. And it forced me to think about what's the next thing they see when they scroll. Well, the community is by far our most complete and valuable offering right now. So let's sell the community first. And I really iterated on these mobile cards a lot, as you can see. I started introducing these actual like mock-ups of the book to get some visual elements in place. And I came up with this idea of showing recorded video of our live events to show what a major part of our community is, which is our authors interacting and, often with like big name authors. And so then I went back to the desktop version and I relayed that out. And not dissimilar from this, sort of playing with the idea, adding some graphical elements, squiggles and things. And this is the first time I started really trying to think of how this video works and how I wanted to feel on the page. And the feedback I got from the team was like, hey, it looks cool. And the feedback I got from just people who aren't familiar with our work was, what do I look at? It's so busy. And of course it is. Look at it. It's crazy busy. It's like the busiest thing in the world. So I stripped everything back. And this is like the next version along. And in this version here, I tried to focus just on the visual elements and keep the text sort of have the text have the same visual weight. And it kind of works, but again, this is very slapdash. I didn't really stick to the grid on this either. Just trying to feel my way through it. And in the end, I decided I really need to get back and become simple. Here's another version of this with colored blocks brought back in, some gradients, some drop shadow to pop. But ultimately, I decided that these versions were just so busy and so ugly. So as you can see, I dropped down here and started to go simple. And I just stripped everything away to try to get it simple, like just the visual elements, the video, the book mockups, the titles. I was playing with this idea of maybe it's a sidebar scrolly thing. And then I got to here. And if you've seen the site, this looks familiar. And what I decided I knew I wanted to do is I wanted to use a grid layout to group different products together. So the Useful Authors community is all grouped into one sort of nicely packed grid. And I wanted to use these proofreader marks to add some character and fun to the major copy, but also make them actions. When you click them, it jumps to the different sections. And you can start to see, I really start to build some elements here that are represented in the final site. And I did some color variations, header variations. And then I did that thing where I went back to mobile. And I realized if you're on a phone, which a lot of our authors are, this doesn't matter. What matters is what you can click through. And so I hit on these final versions. And the concept here is I want the front text, this strapline, to be huge and massive, like a massive typography poster. So if you're on desktop, it's huge. If you're on mobile, it's huge. And then the idea is you then jump to the sections that you want. And here's the Useful Authors section, description, video, everything's packed together. And here's the book section. And that's it. So it's sort of like three little microsites on one big site. And this is where I stopped designing, at least in the traditional sense. This is where I stopped designing in Figma because I had enough on page here to go do it. And this is something I think is a bit unique to my process is I don't go all the way to the end and then code it. While I've been making all these mockups, while this Figma document was designing, almost every screen, after it got to a place where I felt it was interesting, I would go into code and start to mock that up. And so that's how we built this website from start to finish. I think from end to end, it took about 4 months. The first 2 months were a bit on again, off again, wasn't really focused. But the last 2 months was determined building. And I'm really happy with the final product. It is a simple site, but it has a lot of like nice little things like the animations. And I think we did a great job finally capturing each of the major parts of our business in different cards. So hopefully that was useful to see the behind the scenes, all the guts of doing this. It was a huge roundabout process to actually make it in the end. I would love to hear what you think. So leave us a tweet, leave us a comment on the video on what we could have done better or maybe what you found useful. Would love to know. Oh, and of course, if you're an author, come join us in the community. We'd love to have you. Doesn't matter if you're just starting out or you have a couple of books under your belt. I think Useful Books can help you in a lot of different ways, both providing platform, feedback, and support. So maybe we'll see you in our community in the future.